I'm just going to explain what we're going to do, and then we're going to do the thing that we're going to do. But let me first introduce you to the book that we're mostly going to be talking about today, which is Selim Özdoğan's The Blacksmiths' Daughter, which is part one of a trilogy. I just got it on hand immediately, always. And the trilogy tells the story of one woman's life from kind of before her birth to the very end of her life. She comes from Turkey. And we know during the first book, she moves at the end of that first book, The Blacksmiths' Daughter, to Germany. And we know that pretty much all the way through. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about our work and how we do it. And because it's a co-translation that Ayça and I did together, we are going to attempt today to kind of recreate that working process, which is very sort of circular and communicative, by just not having a moderator, not having anyone sharing this. We're just going to ask each other questions. We're going to read you some little snippets from Blacksmith's Daughter, and we're going to finish off, and then we're going to get your wait, which way? First, we're going to answer your questions. No, first we're going to read a little snippet from the Blacksmith's Daughter. Then we're going to answer your questions, and then we're going to finish off with a little sneak preview from the book that's coming next, which only the two of us and Angela here in the audience have read yet in English. So I'm going to hand over to Ayça, who's going to start with the introductions.
I'm going to start the introductions. I'm going to introduce Katy, if you've not heard of her. So Katy Derbyshire is a translator and she's publisher at V&Q Books. She grew up in London, where I am now, and she now lives in Berlin. And I'm not going to say more because there's a lot. So handing over to one of you.
Yeah, handing over to me, because I'm going to introduce Selim Özdoğan, who was born in Cologne and still lives there. And he grew up bilingual in German and Turkish, and has published, I cannot count the number of books, many books, and his first publication was in 1995. And he also teaches yoga. Over to you.
Ayça Türkoğlu has been a freelance translator for since 2015. She lives in North London, and her most recent translation is a book called Slime, A Natural History by Susanne Wedlich, and is out next month in the UK.
That is true. So I'm going to start off by asking a very simple question to either of you. When do you start work?
Oh, Selim, you probably start earliest.
Maybe not. I used to start work after lunchtime, before I had kids. I get up early in the morning, even with no kids. I got up early in the morning, and then I just wasted my time, and then I had lunch, and then I started to work. Nowadays, when the kids are off to school, I start work, and then I have to pick up the kids, and then work ends. And if there is a deadline to meet, you work in the evening as well.
Yeah, that's exactly how I used to work when my son was younger. And now that he's 20 now, so now I don't even get up until 8 in the morning, which is a huge luxury. I find I'm most productive from about 10 till 2 or 3, and then everything tails off. What about you, Ayça?
It's not particularly interesting. I usually start at 9. I only work well in the morning. Like I don't work well from in the afternoon, and I can't, like, it's like my brain starts to feel sort of noisy. So I like, whereas in the morning it's very quiet. And yeah, I like, ideally I'd only really translate like 4 hours. That would be ideal for me, like probably 2 hours at a time, 1 hour break, do some knitting, another hour, lunch, another hour, and then do something that's less intense. But I think that is a bit of a luxury. But yeah, that's what I would ideally do.
I'm going to ask a question now, which is, do you talk out loud while you're working to Selim?
Usually not, but it happens. It happens when I don't know if the sentence really sounds right. I have to talk out loud. And I always thought it would be good to talk out loud while proofreading. But until the last book, I didn't really do it, because it was like, okay, it's a waste of time. There is a deadline we have to meet, so I'll be faster if I don't do it that way. But the last proofreading, I read the whole book aloud. And changed quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because then it was like, no, this sounded right in my head, but it doesn't sound right when I speak it out.
I noticed that when I was preparing for the reading we're doing today, I realized that like when I was translating it, it all sounded like right in my head, but it's very different when you actually speak it aloud. Not to say that it's bad, but it's just like it brings in a whole new element that I haven't really considered, even though everybody says read your work aloud.
Right, that is the thing that they recommend to translators, and I also don't do it. And I just pretend to myself that I'm hearing it in my head while I'm working on it. But there, I don't know if Selim might have seen it. There's this wonderful film, Die Frau mit den 5 Elefanten, about the translator from Russian to German, Svetlana Gaya, who translated all the Russian greats. And she was very elderly. She's no longer alive. And the way she worked, towards the end at least, was that she did, because she couldn't type anymore, she had these assistants who would come in, and she would have a very, I mean, she was in her 80s, Ayça, so we've got a while to go before we get to this stage, but she'd have an assistant who'd come in, she'd have quite a relaxing day, and in the morning the assistant would read aloud what they'd done the previous day, and she'd go, no, let's change that, and then they would kind of, then the assistant, I think the man in the film, would read out the Russian, and she would speak the translation, and he would type it. I mean, marvelous. I aspire to that. I don't know if I'll ever get there, especially because I often share working space, so that's just not going to work. Yeah,
it's really hard to it's really hard to think out of your mouth. I was saying to some other translators on Friday, like the relationship I have with my hands, like the way I work is through my hands. Like I don't think out of my mouth, in case that wasn't already very apparent. And there's just something sort of magical that happens in between. So although maybe if you dictated everything, you'd become really, really eloquent, which is my hope.
Yes, I mean, in the case of Svetlana Gaya, it was, and but I'm interested, actually, veering away from it, I'm just going to hijack this a little bit, because I'm really interested in how our as writers and translators, our brains and our bodies work together. And I've been thinking about sign language interpreters, who obviously are clear, they're really using their bodies all the time, much more than we are. And I'm thinking about it in terms of the things that we and our bodies have experienced and what that brings to the work that we do. In terms of like, if we've experienced discrimination based on our bodies, how does that feed into our work? Or if we're great dancers with our bodies, how do we bring that to bear. But that's not a question.
I think Selim was going to say something in response to that. And since you're a yoga teacher, Selim, I want to know
it's pretty much related. Everything is pretty much related, and you can't really say this is just a single. It's not your brain and your body. Your brain is inside your body, and your brain is wired to your body. It wouldn't work. If you had someone else's hands, you couldn't work them like you work your hands. So yeah, there is definitely a relation. I was reminded of Hunter S. Thompson says how he, when he started to write, copied on his typewriter Fitzgerald just to get the rhythm, which doesn't make any sense to me, because it depends on how fast you can type and how you type. But the thing is, it is always about sound and rhythm. So most of the time you get it right in your head, but sometimes you don't, and then you have to speak it out aloud.
Yeah, it's your turn to ask a question now.
My turn.
Yeah.
Okay. Why music? It's the music question then. Do you listen to music while working and not speaking out loud? Do you listen to music?
I don't. That's the end. No, I listen to white noise, or on YouTube you can get like ASMR, like ambience kind of thing. So you can get like Japanese like coffee house, or like a road in the 1800s in Victorian England where for some reason there are cicadas. Anyway, I've got a lot of criticisms of it. But basically any kind of white noise I have to listen to. I can't listen to music because it makes me too emotional. And it like if I listen to Turkish music, I would just get sidetracked within like half an hour, and I'll just be like thinking about something from when I was 3 or something. And if I listen to music, I can't kind of hear. I can't hear the sort of voice in my head that I think is, I've been telling myself is equivalent to the voice that speaks out loud, but maybe isn't. So I can't, which is a shame to me. I mean, maybe if I was sort of churning something out. I did go through a phase of doing commercial work where I would just listen to like all of Billy Joel's hits very loudly, singing along while doing like a 10,000 word shampoo catalogue. And I enjoyed that, but I'm not sure the translation was very good. So what about you, Katy?
You know, I can't, same, I can't do it, except I did have a task for a while that I could, which was like very mind-numbing, and then I found I could do it, and I can't for the life of me remember what that job was. I obviously don't do it anymore because it was very boring. Maybe it was well paid. And then of course I loved listening to music while I was doing it. But what I pre-lockdown used to do a lot was walk with music and have little thoughts going, because I think a lot of translation doesn't happen at your desk, or probably writing as well, right? It happens in between. So certainly in terms of translation, it will often be like you cannot think of the right translation for something. Nothing's quite working. And those walks with music, where I was sometimes like dipping into listening and not listening while walking, and all those different, the sounds and the sights and the smells in the park, I found quite conducive to creativity. Selim, do you listen to music while you're writing?
Yes.
Oh.
Most of the time, yes. Mostly it's sometimes it's just music I like to listen to, but mostly it's I like to listen to the same type of music while working on one text or on one novel, which somehow for me creates the right atmosphere. But what doesn't work at all, most of the things work. German hip hop doesn't work because then I got sidetracked and I'm like, okay, I'm listening to the words now. It's not the music playing in the background, but I'm listening to the words, and that doesn't work at all.
Can you remember what it was that you were listening to while we're writing The Blacksmiths Daughter?
No, I can't remember.
It's been a while.
But I could look it up on the computer. Well,
Really? Do you have a record?
No, but I could look up which albums did I buy at that time. And then I would remember, okay, but I listened to this one quite often. But I did listen to the Aşık Veysel song. I know that. Uzun ince bir yoldayım. Which was in the intro before we started.
Yeah, if you scroll up, down, backwards in this chat, there's a link to the Spotify playlist that Selim made to go with the book.
With a little help from Ayça.
Yeah, I only really added 2 songs though.
Yeah.
But my mum has listened to the playlist and she liked it.
Sorry?
My mum listened to the playlist and she liked it, so that's the seal of approval that matters the most. I'm going to think of another question to ask you. I'm going to ask this question. How much does writing/translating matter to you? What matters more? Because does it even matter? Does it matter what we're doing? Probably not. We're all going to die eventually. Does it matter? Anyway. Or maybe that makes it matter more. I don't know.
I'm going to start to answer that because it's really hard, and it's something that I've been dealing with, having moved into publishing, that I have to remind myself it's only books when I'm like freaking out and nothing's working, and I do have to remind myself it's only books. On the other hand, I really love translating, and the joy of translating these books that I love, for example, The Blacksmiths Daughter, puts me personally, makes me just generally happier in life. So in a very selfish way, it does matter to me. And I suppose I don't write hardly anything. I've written a couple of essays. I find it very difficult and very much more time consuming. But of course, if the writing wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to translate it. So I don't want to say one matters more than the other, except that they're only books. I hope that especially fiction reaches people and touches people and gives them greater understanding of the world. But plenty of people don't read it and still understand the world. So yeah, that's my answer. I think it matters a great deal to me in terms of my well-being and my kind of literary evangelism. I do want other people to read these books, but ultimately it's not putting an end to war so far.
Maybe the second one.
Yes, the second book will put an end to all wars.
Now,
Change for me. It used to matter. It's all on a personal level. It doesn't matter. We all die in the end. No, it doesn't really. But when I was young and I wanted to become a writer, I was just desperate. It was just like, either I will be a writer or I have another option. I can kill myself. So, and I couldn't see any other way. It was just like, okay, it's this or that, or nothing. Well, that is nothing. And it changed a lot during the last, what is it, 25, 26, 27 years. Because I thought, like, I can't work with people. I don't like that. It's not like that. I enjoy working with people nowadays. And it's, if you just took the writing away, it would be like, okay, I know other things I can do and I love to do and I can get paid for it. But I won't have the same amount of freedom I have with writing. So it still matters, but it's not a life or death matter anymore. It's just like, okay, I enjoy doing this. But I would really love to have quite a lot of money someday. And just to see, just to be a really freelance writer and to be free of that burden and just to see, how does it feel like not to write in 6 months or 1 year? I don't know. I don't know how long I would last, but I don't have the opportunity to check it out because I have to write to pay the rent.
Ayça, you write as well as translating, right?
A bit, but just don't tell anyone. So it's not there yet. I also kind of think it doesn't matter. It also does, like I think I noticed when you talking about it, Katy, said it looks selfish. I think it's selfish as well, not in a horrible way, but like it's for me, it's sort of for my own pleasure, which I hope my husband's not listening because that makes me sound like a knob. But like it's not, I don't know, it's like I really love translating. I find it really satisfying as a creative act, and also less sort of, I don't know, it's less kind of fraught than writing. But there's enough of you you put enough of yourself into it that it feels like it's quite a personal thing. But also, doesn't matter, does it? I could see people saying oh, I'm bringing this literature into this, although I've just realized that's the V&Q slogan, so not V&Q.
Other writers.
But I think maybe once I would have wanted to be oh, going out finding these cultural gems for you English speakers and bringing them back. And I think there's something sort of there's some sort of nasty colonial vibes there. But I'm glad to say that I no longer feel like that. I just feel like I like it. If it's convenient and you get some pleasure out of it, fine. But I really want there to be some kind of higher reason, but there's just not. I just like it.
I mean, for me, it's a bit of it's both selfish and foisting my taste upon others. So and hoping that they get some gain out of that, which in the case of this book, the Blacksmith's Daughter, obviously they do and will, because it's very good.
I don't like the selfish word you both are using because it's not about, well, it's not selfish in a way that you want something for yourself. It's just most people have a very hard time finding things in life which they really do like. So so it's a way of getting to know yourself better. It's a very important thing if you can find something you really enjoy doing. Most people work jobs they don't like, and if you ask them, they don't even know how they would like to spend their time. So it's not really selfish. It's about understanding yourself, which isn't selfish either, because it's, if you don't get to know yourself, you can't really make contact with others.
Can I add in a little additional question here?
Go ahead.
Annoying. So I feel like, I don't know whether to ask or not. I feel like there's a class thing there, which obviously me and Katy like to talk about a lot. Do you think, I think we're all reasonably like sort of grew up in sort of working class families. Do you think there's something to do with the job that you decided to end up with, that you've sort of chosen specifically to sort of something that you actively enjoy, and that's influenced by your relationship with your class background and seeing people doing jobs that they maybe don't enjoy? Not saying that all working class jobs aren't enjoyable, but they're harder. Yeah.
I've just checked if my mum is here, so she's not, and I won't share the video. I grew up with my parents. My mum never enjoyed her work. She wasn't. I mean, my grandparents were very clearly working class. My parents are of that 60s generation who you know, had a little bit of an escape route through institutions. And my dad really loved his work, and my mum didn't. So if I had followed in her footsteps, I would be working in admin and not necessarily not enjoying my work, but you know, getting more out of the people, my colleagues, than out of the work itself. But to see my dad, who worked as a sound recordist on TV, has some similarities, I would say, to translation, in that the material always changes, but the work is the same. And to see his inspiration that he took from that was really important, and made me strive for that as well. Like, look for something that I could do. At the same time, I wouldn't have wanted to go into something completely precarious. I mean, I do translate literature and non-literary texts to make sure I have enough money coming in, and that's always going to be a concern. And one of the reasons I can do that is because I live in Berlin rather than in London. There is I don't know if there's a class aspect to the choice of my career or not.
I just had to bring.
I think there's not many people. I mean, most people who work in literary translation are kind of from a middle class background, but that may very well reflect the publishing industry as a whole.
Yes, I think it's quite unlikely. Coming from a working class background to choose a path like this, because you don't have a role model, you make your own decisions, nobody really encourages you to do what you're doing. Quite the opposite. It's like, okay, but you won't be earning any money there. But on the other hand, my father had I don't know what to call it, relationship with work. He was just like, okay, you have to do something to earn money, and it doesn't have to make you feel good or bad. So he didn't really, he worked in a car factory. So does it matter? No. Does it matter? Yes, you need a car. You don't need a book, but you need a car. He didn't really enjoy going there, but he never got upset or was annoyed, even if something went wrong at work. When he came home, he was just like, okay, that's work, and now I'm home. So that's what I learned from my father, which doesn't work for me at all. It's never okay, now I'm home.
Celine, can I fill you up on that? On the sort of statement that you need a car but you don't need a book, like clearly you have felt so much that you needed to write, that for you it was a matter of life or death writing. So that kind of says to me that actually there's something about books that you needed to live. And I would feel like, you know, I don't need a book like I need food, but I maybe do need a book like I need a car, like as in both are sort of enriching my life and offering more than just survival.
Yeah, absolutely true. But most people, if they have to choose between books and their car, they will choose their car, not really realizing that it's not that important to them. That's my guess, my opinion. Then we have people who are enjoying their car more than other reading people enjoy books. So it's not a bad thing. There is this documentary on Conor McGregor, the mixed martial arts champion, who they start off when he has no money, and then they show him in this fancy car, and he's just laughing and saying, people say money doesn't count, you have to experience life, but what I like most is the experience of driving this car. So yeah, for a small percentage of people, for us, books are very, very important. But that's just our little world we live in. It's a nice little world.
I'm going to ask Ayça to answer her own question, and then, because we haven't talked about the book hardly at all, we're going to have a little reading from it, and then we're going to answer your questions.
What was my question? Last thing.
Yes. Yes.
I feel quite guilty having my job because I feel I don't make enough money, and other people have to do things that make them really miserable, whereas I've deliberately chosen something that I find enriching, and that means I can kind of stop and go to my allotment when I want, and also means I don't have to see any people, which is a plus, you might say. But, or at least I have control over when I see people, and I have control over who I see. Gosh, I'm making myself sound like a hermit now. But yes, but both my parents were care workers. My mum is still a care worker. But both my parents were university educated and quite pretentious. I hope my mum's not watching. So it was like a working class household, but with a lot of like pretensions to be kind of like culturally middle class, but not in a crap way. So there was like just a love of like learning stuff and books and stuff, and my dad was constantly trying to get me to read Nietzsche and also lots of Russian authors, none of whom I've read. But I saw that as quite disappointing, that like my parents hadn't been able to like realize, oh, I don't know, like do you even go to do you do a degree to rise out of your class? Not necessarily. Like education is of value anyway, but like I always wanted to do something with the subjects that like I loved so much. So doesn't make very much money though, so can't recommend that. I am fortunately in the position where I can manage it. Yeah.
I know I'm trying to push us onto the reading, but I just want to say my grandparents on one side were like very deeply rooted in the working class, but were incredibly interested in culture. And my granddad, who was like a builder's rep and worked in factories before that, his flat was full of books. You couldn't even get down the corridor. And they all, you know, all his sons made music, and they were painting and, you know, bird watching. I think we need to remember that actually culture is not a preserve of the middle class.
Yes.
Agree.
Very important point.
I do think that.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just
I'm not suggesting you do.
in practice, the access is not, and it's not, people aren't encouraged to be into it,
Yeah.
to the culture. Oh God.
Should we
Let's move on.
out into a little reading for you that Ayça and I have prepared from the book, so that you at least get a taste of the book rather than just us banging on. And then we've started to get some questions in the chat. Thank you very much. Please continue, and we'll just tackle them as they come up after this little reading.
Yes, am I doing the
You are
yellow
doing
bit?
yellow, yeah.
Okay, cool. This, shall I introduce it?
Yes, do.
This is from near the beginning of the book, where Gŵyl is still at primary school, I think, and her dad, Timur, gets into a fight with his nemesis, Tufan, in the village square. Tufan's a bad guy, what can I say? So we're going to read you a bit from the fight. Recep squeezed himself onto the bench where Gŵyl was sitting and whispered to her, "Your dad's got into a row with Tufan. It's going to be a fight in the village square. Your dad's strong, but Tufan has more men."
Gŵyl was agitated. She felt hot. She felt like she couldn't sit still any longer, but she didn't move. Her father was going to fight someone. "Why have they fallen out?" she whispered to Recep.
"I don't know. Are you coming with me?"
"Yes," Gŵyl said. She'd never seen adults fight before.
You could have sung the national anthem for a full year before the school day was finally over. That's how slow time seemed to pass. There was whispering and gossiping. The news spread, and when the teacher declared school over for the day, the pupils streamed out of the classroom faster than ever before and ran, breathless, towards the village square. Everyone wanted to grab a good spot. "Come with me, they'll chase us away from the square," Recep said.
They climbed up a ladder onto the roof of one of the houses that had a good view of the village square. Two groups of men were standing below them, a stone's throw away. Gŵyl instantly recognised her father in the smaller group. The men were shouting, hurling insults at each other. The blacksmith didn't have the loudest voice, but he towered over the rest of them and stood with his head high, his shoulders slightly back, his chest pushed out. He didn't seem afraid at all.
The men picked up stones off the ground and flung them at their rivals. First, someone from Tufan's group would throw one, and the others would retreat. Then Timur's men would throw, and Tufan's friends would put their arms in front of their faces to protect themselves and take a few steps back. One of Timur's mates was hit on the brow, and the left side of his face and his neck were covered with blood, but he shouted the loudest of all. On the other side, even no-nose Abdul squawked out a few swears. Nearly all the children were afraid of him. His nose had been shot off by his brother when the two of them were young. They'd been playing with their father's gun, thinking it wasn't loaded. Abdul only very rarely left the village, so as not to be at the mercy of strangers' stares. In the village, at least the adults had long grown accustomed to his scarred face, the bridge of his nose ending abruptly just beneath his eyebrows.
"Dishonourable dog," Abdul shouted, and from behind him, Tufan yelled, "Crook, dirty pig."
Timur split off from his group and made towards the others. He was lucky. A couple of stones missed him. One clipped his shoulder. When he was standing a good 10 strides away from his group, the others stopped throwing stones. "What's your problem, Tufan, you son of an ox? If you're a man, come over here and fight like one. Don't just throw stones like a woman."
"In case you didn't already know, in this village we throw stones to chase off dogs," Tufan yelled back. "And what are you but a pesky little dog? What business do you have in our village?"
"A good dog doesn't bite people in his own village," Timur said. "Now come and fight like a man." Gŵyl would have liked to shout out loud. She would have liked to do something to make them all get along again, but she sat on the roof and held her breath like all the other children who had gathered up there in the meantime, having been chased away from the village square. A few of the children recognised their own fathers among the groups. Recep wished he had a father who could be standing there too, or at least a brother old enough, but he just had 4 sisters and a mother. Tufan took a few steps forward, not as energetically as Timur had, then turned around to look at his men. Now there were perhaps 15 strides between Timur and Tufan. The first upright and proud, the other a little shorter, his shoulders sunken.
You ripped me off, Tufan said. You robbed me blind. I'll tell you again, I want my cut.
Cut? We agreed on a price for the beans and you got it. We shook on it and now you want to go back on your word.
You conned me. It was far too little.
I gave you a good price and you agreed to it.
You owe me double.
Fuck you. Come and fight me.
Timur took another 2 steps toward Tufan, who was clearly willing himself to stay standing. And suddenly a stone hit Timur in the middle of his forehead. Nobody saw who'd thrown it, because they'd all been mesmerised by the sight of the 2 rivals. Timur hesitated only briefly, wiped a hand over his brow, and then ran at Tufan. But Tufan turned and ran to his men, who were now all flinging stones at Timur to keep him away. Once he'd been hit a few times, the blacksmith stopped and walked back slowly. When he was far enough away, he turned around again.
You cowards. Can't even fight like men. If I get hold of any of you, I'll use you to plug the hole you crawled out of.
He yelled the air out of his lungs, and a single trickle of blood ran between his eyebrows and then down the left side of his nose, disappearing into his thick blonde moustache.
We're going, he said.
Tufan had run away. The matter was closed. Gŵyl ran home excitedly and told her mother what she'd seen. So we've got more questions. Thank you very much already. And I'm going to pick the first one because Kay asks Ayça and myself to hear something about the co-translation aspect, which is quite unusual, although we've been hearing a fair bit about it today, actually. How does it work? How does it work for us, Ayça?
It's quite easy, really. There's not much to say. No, it has been very easy. So we split up the book, or Katy split up the book into sections of about 1,000 to 2,000 words, and then we'd send a section, we'd translate a section, we'd do alternating sections, send our section to the other would go through it, edit it, make suggestions, write little comments, send it back, then we'd kind of neaten it up and then put it in the final, well, the official first draft. But it's been quite a sort of relaxed process. We just sort of talk to each other occasionally, send each other an email. I think it was quite easy to sort of develop a kind of common style. That mostly happened at the beginning of the Blacksmiths' Daughter. We both kind of tended to agree on everything.
Yeah, maybe the Germans have this terrible word, harmoniesüchtig, which means you're addicted to harmony, which doesn't sound negative. I don't think it is. I think if you're translating, you need to find that. I mean, metaphorically, you have to find a kind of harmonic base to work on. The reason I think it worked particularly well with this book, the way we divide it up, is because it's told in kind of anecdotes, and we just did little anecdote by anecdote alternating, and I think that worked very well. Selim, very quickly, how did you stick those anecdotes together, because they're based on kind of family stories that you heard, right?
I can't really answer. I don't know, because there's no, like, I didn't sit down and develop a plan and then started to write. It was just like, okay, I want to start here, and then I do this bit, and then we do a flash forward, and then maybe this one fits in here, and it usually seemed to fit. That's all I can say.
Yeah, This sounds like we're being very vague, but actually we're being vague because the book lent itself very well, I think, to co-translation, and then Ayça and I can only speak for myself, have really enjoyed working together on that one, and the one that we've just finished translating, book 2 in the trilogy. There's a question that I've got directly here, but that nobody else can see apart from Caitlin and Carolyn. For Selim, what influences your decision to listen to music while working? I tend to listen to Turkish and Kurdish folk while I work. Do you aim to have something familiar or unfamiliar in the background?
Usually familiar, but once you listen to an album more than twice, it's somehow familiar. So it can be new stuff, or it can be new songs from an artist I already know. So no real rule there.
Oh, Caitlin asked me what it's been like setting up a press in the last year. It wasn't the ideal point in time because everybody's been under a lot of pressure, and it would have been easier had bookshops been open all the time. But things like this today, I think, wouldn't have been possible had we not gone into lockdown. So I'm very glad of that, and I've learned. I mean, it's a huge, very steep learning curve starting out as a publisher in the first place, but adding to that these kind of virtual opportunities, and I do feel my brain is buzzing a lot of the time. Hard to switch off, but it's also given me a sense of agency that I never had before as a translator, because these books are the books that I've chosen, which rarely happens as a translator. You don't, or it's more difficult to get to do the books that you love. And so that has gone to my head, and I am now a terrible tyrant. And Melanie asks whether I am interested in pitches for translators for V&Q, or whether I very understandably rely on my own knowledge of German books. So, okay, Melanie, hello, I can see you. The answer is two different things. I have been living in Berlin for 25 years, and I'm kind of quite immersed in German literature, so I don't necessarily need pitches for German books, although I do like to know who is interested in which writers, like which translators are interested in which writers, and I love having conversations about books, so I don't think I would want formal pitches. I'm more interested in conversations about German books. What I do really very much want is pitches. So Caitlin introduced us and said that we publish mainly translations from German, but also translations and original English writing that came about in the books that originally came about in Germany. So next spring, at the same time as we publish part 2 of this trilogy, we're going to publish a book written by a Croatian author, Ivana Zajko, who lives in Berlin and writes obviously in Croatian. And we will, I can't talk about it yet because we haven't signed a contract, but there'll be some original English writing. And so that if translators are aware of outstanding writers who live in Germany and write in other languages than German or English, which are the only two I can read, sadly, then I would be very pleased to receive pitches like that. And that is, I don't see any more questions. Do anybody have any more questions?
Very exciting. And what I really like the idea of I like the idea that one a publisher that specializes in a country does not necessarily specialize in one language, sort of as you can see here in the Blacksmiths Daughter. Is there anything that was particularly challenging for you, Selim, whilst writing, or for you two whilst translating? Was there anything about this book that was a particular challenge for you guys? Go on, Selim first, since writing comes first.
No, there wasn't any.
It was just
it was published in 2005 in German, so it's quite a long time ago. And
how does it compare with stuff you've done more recently?
Well, maybe the novel I'm working on right now might be the most challenging, but I might say that any given time for the current novel. No, the one right now is I did a whole lot of research, which I usually don't do, so it's more challenging. This was more, the research part was really easy. I remember ringing up my parents and saying things like, it's 1950, spoons, are they made of wood or metal? That was like, I enjoy writing, so I don't remember any particular challenge.
I think in terms of translation for me, and Ayça will see this differently maybe, this first book is set in Turkey, where I've never been, and I'm eternally embarrassed that I'm very bad at pronouncing Turkish names. And so for me, that was the difficult part, which I first discovered the book very shortly after it was published a long time ago, and naively imagined I would be able to translate this immediately and find a publisher for it. And didn't even consider that really. So working with Ayça, who does know those things, was what saved my bacon in terms of that. And the second book that we've just finished translating is set in Germany, albeit at a time before I got here. So that's like, I need a time machine for that part, even though I'm familiar with a lot of the kind of cultural references there. But that's fairly standard. Don't know about, what do you think, Ayça?
I didn't find it hard. Oh gosh, no, it wasn't like, I don't mean like, oh, it was so easy, but it was just a very kind of relaxed, like pleasant experience. It wasn't hard. One thing I thought to say, I wonder if this is a bit defensive, because I feel like I have to prove that I was right to translate this book with you, not just because I happen to be half Turkish, but like I wouldn't have been familiar with like just any Turkish setting. Like it happened to be the case that this was very similar to what I was like. My experience of Turkey is mainly summers, mainly villages, like sort of peasant life is what I would call it if people didn't use the word peasant pejoratively, like sort of like quite rural a lot of the time. And I felt like that was, I don't know, it was good that I worked on it, probably, yes. Because like half of the sayings that Selim used, I didn't recognize, and he didn't recognize when it got like, but it was just kind of having a familiarity with the sort of setting.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of hidden Turkish sayings in the German. It was originally written in German, in case that wasn't clear, which I certainly wouldn't have noticed. I mean, you notice as a translator, I think, when something is out of the ordinary. and that's the time when you want to be communicating with the writer and asking why, if you can't work it out yourself. But yeah, that went into it. What the plan is now, to give you a sneak preview of part 2 in the trilogy, which will be out on the 1st of April next year, unless anyone has any more questions. Then we would finish with that, first we get a little bit in German.
Yeah, what's Selim going to read?
You don't know.
We don't.
This page.
Oh,
207.
207.
Doesn't really matter, does it? Yes, it does. Okay. Als Kind hat Gŵyl viel Zeit bei ihrem Vater in der Schmiede verbracht. Und später, als sie jung verheiratet war, kam Timur nahezu jeden Morgen im Haus ihrer Schwiegereltern vorbei. Nun kommt er meist vormittags, sitzt mit seiner Tochter in der Küche, die wie der Rest des Hauses längst eingerichtet ist. Er legt seine Mütze auf den Tisch und während Gŵyl das Essen vorbereitet, sprechen die beiden von alten Zeiten. Davon, wie verstreut die Geschwister nun sind, über das Wetter, die Apfelernte, die Kühe, den riesigen Kühlschrank aus Deutschland, über Jelen und die Schule, über Jada und die bevorstehende Geburt, darüber, dass Fuad nun wieder wie ein Junggeselle in einem kleinen Apartment wohnt, über das Leben in der Heimstraße, über das Trocknen der Aprikosen, die Käfer im Walnussbaum, über die Enkel und Nichten, über Susan, die in Italien lebt und nicht mal mehr im Sommer kommt.
Thank you. Many, I couldn't have pronounced any of those. That would have been difficult, all those names. So we've got a little section, again, divided up between me and Ayça. I start this one.
Okay. And they're not connected.
No.
Okay.
Just a tiny little taste. So it's the same characters. Gŵyl is our heroine and Fuad is her husband. Gŵyl can't help, excuse me. Gŵyl can't help that Fuad doesn't like the food, but she feels guilty all the same. She's not that keen on it either, but she doesn't know what to do about it. She came here, to Germany, with a cardboard suitcase because they have everything here, and yet there are lots of things she can't buy. Where they live, there's not a single butcher who sells lamb, let alone garlic sausage like sucuk. She seldom finds garlic anyway, and she gets the feeling it's sold by the clove, not the kilo. She rarely finds fresh chilies, and the grocer has weights as small as 100 grams by the scales. There's no pepper paste, but they do have tomato paste in the kind of tubes used for shaving cream or toothpaste in Turkey.
They like to tease newcomers with that tomato paste, Fuad explained. Tomatoes in a tube? No one would believe it. Tubes are for things that belong in the bathroom. So they hand the new chaps a tube and say, the Germans have this shaving cream that gives you a proper shave. Your face will be as smooth as a baby's bum. You won't look a day over 12. And when I say it, as a former barber, then there's real weight to it, Fuad brags. So these poor lads smear the tomato paste over their faces, and the prats are none the wiser, so they take a razor to it. Beggars belief. And you're standing there egging them on. Go ahead, go on. Don't be surprised by the colour. It's got an ingredient in it that stops the blood. That's why it looks the way it does. As if that makes any kind of sense.
He laughs as if he's known the score since his first days on Earth. They don't always find things they're familiar with here, but some of them find fruits with names they've never heard before. A man from Kars, who can't read or write, gives Fuad a banana.
You can't eat the seeds, he warns him. They're poisonous. And the fool chews away on the peel and says, doesn't taste all that great if I'm honest. They'll still be laughing about it years later.
Thank you.
I love that bit.
Secret taste. As you'll see, it's very funny.
Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed this informal chat. I think it was lovely to hear from all of you and to see a bit of your working dynamic and how that works. So thank you all very much for taking the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not at all, not at all. And a round of applause from everybody in the chat. Sort of a silent one. We won't bother with unmuting, but thank you all very much.